Welcome, everyone. We are so excited that you were able to join us. I have Chandy Hoke here, and she is a registered dietitian and licensed medical nutrition therapist who created the Oncology Nutrition Program at Methodist in 2006. Most of you, or some of you, may have come to our chef's table, and she is always a rock star, and we were so thrilled to be able to bring her into your home this evening in the convenience of your bunny slippers and hot cocoa, probably. So she has spent the last decade working strictly with oncology patients and is only one of two in the entire state of Nebraska who is board certified as a specialist in oncology nutrition. So we're thrilled to have her. She believes nutrition is a powerful supportive therapy that can help patients get through cancer therapy and thrive in our survivorship, which is all about what Project Pink is all about. So welcome, Chandy. We're so excited to have you. I'm letting you sit here, and then you can take over. And please remember, as you are dialed in, please submit your questions as she is talking. She'll present, and then we'll open up for questions, and we'll moderate and get those questions answered for you. Okay?
Awesome. Thank you all for having me tonight. I will be honest, this is my first Zoom webcast type of thing. So most of the time I'm in a live audience, so hopefully I don't cut the stream or anything like that accidentally. Cynthia would cry. Okay, so I have some information that I'd like to share with you, and I love questions, feedback. A majority of my normal talks are centered around that, so please, I'm going to save ample time at the end to kind of address any of your needs. But the information that I want to share with you tonight comes from a very credible organization. It's the American Institute for Cancer Research, so AICR.org. They came out of the World Cancer Fund, and they were created solely to help professionals, survivors, the public understand all the research that's being published in nutrition, food, physical activity, controllable lifestyle factors, and pull it all together. Some of the harder things in research around nutrition is trying to get the strength in the numbers, have the information and the research done in a credible way that you can actually take those recommendations and apply them in public health for certain health sectors and have it be meaningful. So it's very different than research that's published in the world of pharmaceutical medicine. And because of that, in the oncology nutrition world, at least the way I practice, no single study trumps these guidelines. So I look to this organization to help me pull all of the research together to help me understand better how to communicate it with you. So I'm going to share pieces of that research with you tonight. I'm going to toggle right now to the screen. Let's see, I'm going to share. Can you see this? So,
yes.
Okay. I want to share with you this blueprint, a little bit about the ones that I'm going to talk about this evening. This was the combination of everything in that food, nutrition, physical activity, lifestyles, the controllable world that is meaningful as a survivor to think about actively making changes. So they kind of help prioritize it, and I really like this new schema on how it kind of breaks it down. So the ones that I really want to focus tonight are kind of on the top half. So when we look at the research that's published, the priority, meaning where's the biggest strength in the research, is actually being at a healthy weight. So this is information sometimes can be more sensitive to hear. Sometimes our providers, our healthcare workers have a harder time having that talk with cancer survivors because it can feel very, very personal. And so this information is never meant for you to feel like you're being picked on. It's really just an awareness piece. So right now, including postmenopausal breast cancer, there's 13 other cancers that can be directly related to your weight status. So that's why, as a society, as a survivor, we need to start having those healthy conversations on, what can I do to achieve a healthy weight or to be at a healthier weight. And so the recommendations that follow after that really are helping us know the importance of it, and then what can we do? So physical activity, once again, not my area of expertise. I always joke that I know just enough to be dangerous in this area, but physical activity is one of the key components that can help us be at a healthy weight in conjunction with the food choices that we make. So being physically active, they looked at all types of activity. So they looked at things that was cardiovascular, they looked at things that help us build muscle mass, they looked at things that provided more balance or core strength, and really they found benefits to all types. They really said that to look at finding something that you liked and starting. In the world of physical activity, we usually try to break it up throughout the course of the day. So there's more research that's even coming out that not just going to a gym or dedicating 15, 20, 30 minutes to solid physical activity, but during our day, not being behind a screen all day long or behind a computer, but actually physically getting up. So we liken it to, instead of always sending emails, is there a possibility to get up, walk down the hall, talk to a colleague? Because all parts of those physical activity actually are beneficial. So in conjunction with being at the, how do we achieve the healthy weight, really it comes down to that diet component. Now, this aspect really got heightened this last few years. So if you look at this, it says eat a diet rich in whole grains, vegetables, fruit, beans, and so those would also include legumes, seeds, and nuts. Because they really wanted to make sure that a lot of the historical research has been done in vegetables and fruit, but really there's been a lot more recently published in those whole grains, legumes, beans, and things of that nature. The concept that's not on this schema, but you can look on this website, so aicr.org, and find it, is their new American plate concept. So a lot of times I get questions like, what's the best? What do I focus on? Is it berries? Is it beans? Is it whole grains? I mean, where's the priority? And the spoiler alert is, if it comes from a plant, we need to be eating more of it more often in a variety of different ways. Eat it raw, cook it, chop it, blend it, incorporate it into stuff. But as a society, we just need to be eating more. And this new American plate concept is very nice because you don't have to carry measuring cups, no serving sizes, etc. It's technically looking at your plate. If 2/3 to 3/4 comes from a plant, then that's exactly where it needs to be. That 1/3 to 1/4 can be from animal origin. So the research really says we don't have to be a vegetarian, we don't have to be vegan, but the bulk of our diet needs to come from plants. Sometimes, along with those plant questions, I get questions, especially in the breast cancer arena, looking at soy. So soy would be considered one of those beans out there that looks a little different than its bean brothers or bean sisters, if I can make a funny joke. It is primarily a protein and a fat, where things like kidney beans, garbanzo beans are mainly a carbohydrate and a protein. It has some different nutritive properties that look a little different than those kidney beans or garbanzo beans. So in the nutrition world, when we look at big nutrients, you look at the carbohydrates, the protein, the fats. You look at smaller nutrients like vitamins, then minerals, and then these little non-nutritive ones called phytochemicals, or little plant-based compound chemicals that actually have health properties. In breast cancer, some of the ones we look at are examined because they might mimic something that looks close to what our human body does. So in the world of these phytochemicals would be phytoestrogens, or these plants that look like they make compounds that look like estrogen or estradiol, human estrogen, isoflavones, And some of the ones that we know specifically that are in soy are diazidine and genistein. And early in some research, people looked at these compounds, thought, it looks really similar to human estrogen. I wonder if it functions the same way. We put them in a cellular dish along with cancer, and we studied them. And it kind of raised the question of, there's a reaction, we don't really know what's going on. Let's study it in an animal model. So they gave rats breast cancer, and they fed them a diet full of soy. And from that recommendation came the mantra of all survivors should not eat soy. And we marched to that beat for quite a long time until, as always, research gets a little bit more specific, it gets a little better, and we realized there was some flaws with that study. For the first thing, we're not rats, so that's a good thing to figure out, because rats can't digest diazidine. So the compound that's in soy will always become toxic in rats because their bodies can't metabolize it. So the study was kind of flawed. So we looked kind of at that cellular study. Let's get more technical now that science has advanced. And what we started to realize is cells have entrances into them called receptor sites. The receptor sites are what allows something to come in a cell, like a hormone, and activate a mechanism. For breast cancer, we know some cancers, not all, might thrive in a hormone-saturated environment. So some of our long-term maintenance drugs aim to prevent that. So when we look at tamoxifens or aromatase inhibitors and how we manage that type of environment. So what they found was soy would go to the receptor site, just like human estrogen, but for the most part, it doesn't do anything but kind of block the road. Other studies have come along the way to actually show us that soy, so normal food quantities, a couple servings a day at the most, can actually make some of our medications like tamoxifen work more effectively. Now, food isn't out there to replace medicine, but it's nice to know that when we're looking for increasing those plant-based foods, that soy, especially since it is a complete protein, might be an option for a survivor that wants to have a meatless meal, maybe they're lactose intolerant and want to use things like soy milk. So from that food perspective, it's awesome to know that we shouldn't have to fear our plants. So if it comes from a plant and it looks like a plant, kind of resembles what it came off the tree or the ground, we need to eat more of it more often. Now getting to the other little section of that plate, we know, like I said before, we don't need to be vegetarian or vegan. The research hasn't showed us that it's a hard line, but there is an increased threshold. So when we look at kind of the middle of that schema, we really need to look at how our consumption of red meat plays into our everyday diet. So what we do know is red meat, which is beef, lamb, or pork, those protein structures look very similar. We digest them very similarly, and they have similar byproducts and iron contents. And some of those are cancer-causing processes. Now, the good thing is we eat a lot of plant-based foods. We have antioxidants. They help us neutralize those effects. But there is a threshold, and the threshold means that our body is able to consume and use them, but at a certain amount, it becomes harder on our body to clear that. So the studies that really have been pulled together that highlight that look at the consumption of 18 ounces of cooked weight a week. So what that means is we can still enjoy red meat, but we really should look at how often we're eating it and how much when we eat at that certain time. And looking for other options so that we're not eating red meat every day for lunch, every day for dinner. The research on poultry, so turkey and chicken, isn't as strong. It looks a little bit different as far as those structures, some of the digestion process, and then fish is its own animal. It's got a different fatty acid profile, and we just don't have as much robust research on it. So really, we have the bulk of it looking at red meat, but when we look at prevention as a whole, really meat, or anything that comes from an animal, like cheese, dairy, milk, that type of stuff, really is the condiment on the plate, and it's not the main deal. On this website, they will give you tips and tricks on how you can go from what's considered more of a Western diet, where, you know, the piece of steak is so big, it's pushing all the other food off the plate, so to speak, and how do we get to more of this guideline looking at it's really in moderation. Some of the other things to take into consideration, that we know that there's maybe some possible risks on how we cook meat. We know that high temperatures, so some of that charring that can go along, as well as with a grilling technique, when the fat, it's a fat source and the vapor or that smoke comes up, all of those are considered carcinogenic processes. So there's not exact studies that link, you know, if you have this much char on your meat, your increased risk of cancer is X. We don't have that type of research, but what they did look at is how can we still enjoy those types of foods the safest way possible. And one of the fabulous things they found out is if you marinate your meat, you can actually negate some of that risk. Studies are kind of a little bit varied, but anywhere from 50 up to some high 70%, which is pretty cool. Why does that work? Well, if you think about it, meat is a porous or an absorbable tissue. And so if you have it full of marinade, it can't take anything else on, like that smoky vapor. They also gave some other great techniques looking at when you do use grilling, to kind of use like a tenting. So whether you use kind of like aluminum foil on your grill to kind of divert those drippings off, using leaner cuts of meat so some of that fat doesn't hit the heat source and create the smoky vapor. But they talked about, you know, it doesn't mean it's a yes or a no type of response. It's really how do we become safer consumers of meat when we do eat it. Other research they do have is looking at processed meat. So processed meats would be like our salamis, pepperonis, those hard kind of cured meats. The preservative agent that they put in them, sodium nitrate, is another one that's harder for your body to process out, excrete, and is a carcinogenic process. So when we look at things like hot dogs, like bratwurst, things of that nature, those are really like special occasion foods and not meant to be everyday type of foods. Speaking of special occasion foods, before I move on, because we're going to kind of talk about where some other research in that food arena is, it's looking at how we look at making these type of changes. For example, when I meet with patients individually, I challenge them to look at staples. What are things that they eat, that they have in their house, that they eat quite a bit of? Those are the types of foods, when we look at making changes, are the changes that I recommend. Why? Because those staple foods, things you do in, day out, maybe every day of the week, really make the biggest impact in who we are. Things that really can be looked at a later time would be things like special occasion foods, holiday foods, birthday foods, things that are tied to celebrations and memories. If you're celebrating something every week, then yes, maybe this is a food we need to look at. But if you're truly honoring it for what it is, it's a holiday, it's a one-time-a-year thing, it's my birthday. No one bite of food gives us instant health or instant bad things that happen. And when we look at our eating patterns, we have to be able to embrace foods that might be every once in a while foods, and how do we incorporate them in and have a good, healthy relationship with them. One of the saddest things that I see is survivors who tell me, you know, it was my birthday and I was eating the cake, and the whole time I was thinking, this is so bad for me. Why am I eating this? Bad things are happening, you know, things of that nature, when that's not how food works in our bodies. So we need to get to a place where we can really look at those special foods and honor them for what they are, and focus on where we can make the biggest impact in our lives, those everyday staple foods. So kind of going into some other known research that we have out in the food world would be looking at sugared beverages. So our body and how it recognizes liquid calories. There's not a very good communication from your stomach to your brain. So survivors who are actively going through treatment, who don't feel like eating, but really need to get in some quality nutrition, looking at some smoothies, some milkshakes, where we can blend up some plant-based fruits, some good quality proteins, can actually be beneficial because it doesn't impact that feeling of fullness or satiety. Survivors who are not in active treatment, who are in surveillance, who are really striving to maybe achieve that healthy weight, might not realize that your body doesn't recognize those liquid calories and tell your brain, hey, it's time to stop eating. So where that can come into play is if we would drink a whole meal's worth of calories and then still feel hungry and want to eat our lunch or dinner or breakfast on top of it. So for the most part, they've asked people to make a conscious effort and really limit or avoid those type of sugar sweetened beverages. And the same thing would go to the next recommendation, looking at those fast foods. So fast foods, for the most part, are highly processed. They're usually still full of quite a bit of calories, and a lot of the other nutrition, fiber, some vitamins, minerals, have been probably stripped out due to the processing. Research has shown us that when we frequent places like fast food, we have a harder time maintaining healthy weight. So once again, it's looking at where do we make our food choices from, and is it helping us achieve our health goals, or is it maybe potentially keeping us from reaching our health goals? And then the same thing would come into play with alcoholic beverages. Unfortunately, when we look at that threshold that I talked about with the red meat, we don't have that for alcohol. Technically, all alcohol consumption is a potential carcinogenic process. So it's the ethanol that your body has to metabolize and excrete out. It doesn't matter if it's red wine or hard spirits or a beer, it's all hard on our body. So this is really an education process. It's telling survivors that it still endorses moderation. So if a survivor would choose to have a drink, please enjoy the kind you like. Don't drink red wine because you think it's so super healthy, but you think it tastes disgusting and you can't believe you're choking it down. Drink something you like to drink. Look at the guidelines, which would state 1 drink a day for women and 2 for men. Unfortunately, women, due to our water content, we don't get as much as guys, which stinks. It's just how it is. And they also said, if you don't do it one day, it's not like you can save them up and cash in all your coupons over the weekend. So really, it is in moderation. You either use it or you lose it type of thing. But you shouldn't feel that you have to partake to be healthy. When we look at things like red wine, one of the compounds in it, resveratrol, we can get through other grape type products, eating grapes, the grape skins, things of that nature. So it's not that you have to drink red wine to be healthy. I only bring that up and I laugh because I actually enjoy red wine, but it's kind of interesting. A number of survivors that will come in and say, I'm drinking red wine, but I really hate it. So once again, if you're going to have a drink, drink what you like. And then the other recommendations at the bottom. So the great thing about these, not only are they for survivors, they are for everyone. So people who have never been diagnosed with a cancer, they have been shown that we can actually decrease our risk of this chronic disease as well as others. So when we look at these guidelines, not only is cancer a chronic disease, but things like cardiovascular, obesity, diabetes, and we know that cancer survivors are at a higher risk for some of those other chronic conditions after being diagnosed with cancer. So really, it's kind of a one-size-fits-all on looking at how we can be the healthiest. The last one that's on there is looking at supplementation. So to stand on my soapbox, I am very much food first. I am an avid believer in exhausting all of our options on how we can get it through food. If we don't like raw tomatoes, can we do it cooked, like in a marinara sauce, things of that nature. It's really looking at multiple different ways to get in an actual food item in food quantity before we look to supplementation. AICR does not recommend the use of supplements for cancer prevention. And there's some reasons why. Some of the research that we've done hasn't shown it to be beneficial. In fact, some of the research has actually shown it to be harmful. So that's the scary part. We think we're trying to help ourselves, and really it could actually be doing the exact opposite. A great example would be looking at beta carotene. Beta carotene is the water-soluble form of vitamin A. Water-soluble means if I drink enough, I should be able to excrete it all out. What we do know is when people who smoke take beta carotene supplements can actually increase the risk of lung cancer. We've studied vitamin E pretty prevalently, and we haven't found any prevention with vitamin E. There's some research looking at folic acid. Folic acid supplementation has really helped us in some arenas, meaning decreasing neurotubular defects for young ladies looking to become moms. In the cancer world, there's some research that shows high levels of folic acid in contact with colon polyps can actually help convert to colon cancer. So once again, looking at supplementation is really an active conversation that needs to be done with a health provider. We know that not only have there been some adverse things, but for example, survivors that might be on some sort of hormone blocking agent, we know have greater risks of bone health issues later on in life. We actually have research that supports this. And so we know that this is an at-risk population, meaning we have data. You will get recommendations from a physician, and if you needed to be on things like calcium or vitamin D, it's because it was based in research. So I'm not trying to tell you that if your physician tells you you need to be on a supplement to ignore him. That's not the intent. It's to realize that if there's additional things you want to take, that you need to have a conversation with your physician. Dietitians can help you, and pharmacists can help you kind of understand some of the pros, the cons, what's been researched, what maybe hasn't been researched, and things of that nature. Because once again, it's just making sure that you're fully aware of the choice, and if there are possibly adverse reactions, that your physician would be aware of, and it can be documented for later discussions just to make sure they can help have that whole holistic healthcare with you. So this ends my active talk, looking at these guidelines, recommendations, giving you little snippets. I would really love to see what your questions are coming through to see how I can help you. And Cynthia's gonna help me.
I'm telling you, right? Okay, so get those questions, but we do have some. Yeah.
Oh,
so
okay.
Yeah, juicing.
Okay, so a question that we have right now is on juicing. So when we look at juicing, technically it comes from those plant-based foods. So in theory, Chandy should say, yes, you should do it. But we really need to look at it. We are just squeezing the liquid out of those plant-based foods, and we are not getting everything in. It acts in our system more like those sugar and sweet beverages, meaning we don't recognize it with satiety. So my preferred method is blending. So get a good quality blender, put everything in. So pulverize the whole plant and consume it in more of a smoothie application versus just squeezing out the liquid. Another one that came through is sugar. So does sugar feed cancer? This one also is kind of a misinterpretation of science. So I've already told you that plant-based foods have been studied, recommended. We know they're cancer prevention foods. The basic part of digestion with plants is a carbohydrate. So you get from those complex to glucose, or what looks like table sugar in our system. And that's because your body wants glucose for energy. It's the only thing that fuels your brain. All of the cells, your systems, your muscles, they all want it for energy. Unfortunately, cancer is no different. cancer wants it too. Some cancers are so smart that it doesn't matter what you eat, it can create its own glucose source. And there's no way for your body to understand if it came from, let's say, an apple or a piece of cake. So it's not like your body sits there and says, oh, Chandy ate an apple, that's good sugar, we're going to do good things with it. Or Chandy ate a brownie, and now we're going to do bad things with it and feed the cancer, so to speak. It doesn't work like that. There's no ID tags. No cell in your body knows where that glucose comes from. So we need to make those staple foods, a bulk of those foods, those whole foods type of thing. And then look at treatment. So treatment is what's designed to eradicate that disease. Nutrition is designed to help support you to handle the treatment that's been prescribed. So for the most part, go ahead and eat the brownie. Just don't eat the whole sheet pan of brownies by yourself. And realize that you can incorporate those type of foods and you shouldn't have to be fearful on them. Let's see what other questions. Here's a good one. How frequently are the AICR guidelines being updated? So on the website, there's the process called the Continual Update Process, or the acronym is CUP. And when they first published these guidelines, the first set came out in 1997, and then they updated them 10 years later in 2007. And they realized we can't wait 10 years to update these guidelines. It's way too much time. So the continual update process actually looks at this information and feeds it into the system live. Every few years, then, as more information is amassed, it's published. So if you'll look at the breast cancer survivorship one, was published in, I think, it was either 16 or 2017, and how they update it. But like I said before, all of the information is being actively fed into it, so it's not these long periods of time before the guidelines are updated. In the breast cancer one specifically, there's over, so this is really testing my rusty memory, 85 studies, and I want to say there's over 160,000 women that were in these studies that helped solidify the breast cancer guidelines. So it is a very robust, well-vetted process. Another question. Is edamame safe for breast cancer survivors to eat, specifically those diagnosed with ER-positive cancer? And the question is yes. So if you look at where they have found benefit, they have found it to be beneficial for women who are estrogen receptor negative and ER positive and negative. I'll just put them together. And ones that are using a hormone blocker, so something like tamoxifen or aromatase inhibitor. Once again, it's not meant to replace your medication, so it's not meant to replace tamoxifen or aromatase inhibitor, but it can be used safely as just a food source. The one thing we don't have research on is what if I take it above or beyond what we can find in food quantities. So really the solidifying research started to come out about 2004. There was some pretty landmark trials, the Life After study, Life After Cancer epidemiological study, and then the Shanghai study came out. And the Shanghai was an Asian study, and the latest one was a study based out of California, out of an insurance group, Kaiser Permanente, had thousands of women followed for numbers of years. When the initial data was published, it was probably 5 to 7, and then it's been even longer since. They were the first ones that helped solidify when survivors ate soy, they had a reduced risk of cancer recurrence. Subsequently, there's probably been a total of about 5 or 7 other studies, really quality studies that came out that helped solidify that answer. So in actual survivors, we have data that has shown when survivors eat 1 to 2 up to 3 whole soy food servings, so things like edamame, tofu, soy milk, then it can actually be a health protectant or give us better health qualities. What we don't know is if we have a powder. So if we take all the aspects out of soy and we put them in a powder and we take them above or beyond what we could do naturally, what happens? We don't know that. So at this time, we don't recommend soy powders, supplementations, things of that nature. It's really looking at those whole soy foods. Let's see, more questions. Oh, should I avoid flax? So flaxseed is another plant-based food, high in fiber, high in omega-3 fatty acids. It also has some of those phytoestrogen type properties. Once again, a lot of the studies have looked around not survivorship, but endpoints. So looking at maybe how aggressive specific types of breast cancers are and showing some very interesting things. In a very, very small study, so looking at about 30 to 40 breast cancer patients, they looked at women who consumed flaxseed in muffins, so what you would consider like normal food amounts. They weren't taking pills or powders, approximately about a month before they had either a mastectomy or a lumpectomy. And the women that did that, it actually impacted their expression of HER2/neu, which is sometimes looked at on how aggressive that cancer is. Once again, it was looked at that endpoint. We just don't know in survivorship, is there above or beyond? But the good thing is it wasn't scary and bad things didn't happen. Flaxseed also has amazing laxative type properties. So if you've never used flaxseed before and you're gonna try to use some, I would recommend starting low and slow. Normally it's about a tablespoon to 2 tablespoons a day. You can use some flaxseed actually to replace out some of your fat sources when you bake and things of that nature, but it's definitely not something that you should fear. What other questions do I have? Okay, another one that I have are looking at artificial sweeteners. So this is another really good one. Artificial sweeteners actually been in existence for over 100 years. They were discovered accidentally when they were manipulating some different structures and understood that your body can't metabolize them, so you can't break them down and use them for energy, but when they touched your tongue, you perceived them as sweet. Interestingly enough, we looked at in World War II how that might help us because of our diminished food capacity to produce enough food for our soldiers, but would make them feel like they had something sweet. And we could replace it out. We looked at some of the research that was published in the late 70s in a rat model. So once again, we kind of go back to rats. We fed them aspartame, and we kind of got concerned on what happened. When we look at it, the quantities that they were feeding the rats and their duration wouldn't be something that we could mimic in human consumption ever. I mean, to give you kind of an idea, you'd have to have like 96 packets of an artificial sweetener every day, starting at birth, and about our 5th decade of life, a certain percent, about 10%, would have bladder cancer if we looked at how they constructed the rat model study. Now, in more recent years, we've started to look at, not from an oncology point of view, but from the aspect of it's a nutrient that our body doesn't metabolize. So there are people who have sensitivities, meaning it might give them stomach pain, give them like stomach upset and things of that nature when they use things like artificial sweeteners, because once again, your body's not using it, you're just passing it through. And then recently, they're looking at how it might change our metabolism. So our gut is being studied a lot more, and its relationship to how we burn calories and how our metabolism works. And there's some preliminary research that might impact that process. We don't have enough research right now that says, do we have rules? Meaning, if I have too many Diet Cokes a day, is it gonna mess up my metabolism? We don't know that. We just know that it can impact how our metabolism works, but it doesn't mean it's the only thing. So once again, I think it would be, oh my goodness, all the questions. Those are awesome. Now they're all starting to come in. I'm getting panicked. There's like 20 minutes left. So it's, once again, it's something to look at. Most of that would be more of an active conversation. But from a cancer perspective, it's very much been studied as far as it does not contribute to a cancer risk. So there's questions about how do I make an appointment with me? So I don't know if I'm supposed to put a plug in for myself. Is that okay? I am actually, my position is supported by the Harper's Hope, the Harper Foundation, and the program at the Methodist Estherbrook Cancer Center is called Harper's Hope. So if you Google harpershope.org, you can find a click link there with my information as far as my phone number. There's a place to email. So if there's more specific information you want for you, I do phone consultations or emailing information more specific to what you want. So there's some flexibility, but that's how you would get a hold of me. Okay, and
follow-up email. Yep.
Cynthia said they'll put that in the follow-up email. So if there's other additional questions at the end of this and you think, oh, I should have asked it, you have a way to get your question answered. Okay, another question. I'm struggling being too busy to cook healthy meals for one. Do you have any recipes that you might be able to share with me? There are some recipes on AICR. Can you see my kind of go-to for all information? The challenging thing with cooking for one is looking at things that potentially you can cook in maybe batches and things that might be easily stored in the fridge, maybe short term, like you might eat it once or twice a week. And then long term, are there ways that you can save it in the freezer and have your own go-to quick meal? So there are certain things that hold up better than others. AICR does give some good recommendations for that. There's a tab in there called Foods That Fight Cancer, and there's kind of a laundry list of all types of plant-based foods. The reason why I like it is they have a practical tips section. The tips tell you how long does it stay fresh, when is it in season, is it gonna spoil if I put it next to something, and they also give you some good recipes on how you can incorporate it in. So I definitely would look there, but I appreciate that sentiment because sometimes cooking for one can be more challenging, and I don't know if there's a perfect solution, but at least they give you some ideas on what you could do differently. Another question, what is your recommendation for the best legume to incorporate into a diet on a regular basis? So the highest nutrition but easiest to prepare and most versatile. Ooh, that's a good one. Well, you know, a lot of that comes down to taste preference, meaning do I like the consistency? Do I like it intact? Do I want to be able to like make refried beans, things of that nature out of it? It's definitely more economical if you buy it dry. It's more labor intensive because there's usually soaking that needs to go into it, and then either some sort of like cooking it at a low temp for a long time on your stove. I've even seen some people get creative in things like crock pots and things of that nature to make them. I tend to prefer ones that I can use in multiple different ways, meaning, you know, good old fashioned black beans I tend to use a lot. I can put them in soups. I can put them on top of salads. I can incorporate them into things like we're gonna have taco night. I might do less of a meat source and then throw some more beans in there type of thing. I do like the flexibility of garbanzo or chickpeas. That's the staple of hummus. So depending if you like cold chickpeas, like bean salads, once again, throwing them kind of like as toppings, putting them on stuff. But also then if you have an abundance of them, you can throw them in a blender with a little bit of tahini paste, some olive oil. Usually it's a little bit of acid, like lemon juice, and then whatever flavor you want. So you can throw pesto in there. You can throw roasted red peppers. You can do a variety of different things and then use, you know, a hummus as everything, as a dip, as a spread. It's like a mayonnaise substitute, things of that nature in wraps and sandwiches and things like that. So personally, I don't have a favorite one. I would say if it is a legume, then it's still high up there on the plant-based foods. And I don't have a preference other than to actually include them into your diet. Yes, one question is, I love beans, but you said there's prep involved. Can I incorporate canned beans? Absolutely. So they are a little bit more expensive. They're ready to go. Look at the sodium content. Beans are great because they're usually packed in their own juices. Most of that you rinse off. So even if there is a little bit of sodium in that processing, when you rinse it off, it really helps decrease what you would actually take in. And yeah, they can be quick. You're ready to go right then, versus the hours if you're, like I said, putting them in a crock pot or putting them on your stovetop, trying to get them to the right consistency to actually be cooked all the way through. Let's see, another good question. What is more important, body mass index or weight based on height and bone structure? Well, unfortunately, none of them are great. So BMI is a calculation of your weight to your height. Some of the standards were built or based off of some medical data that came in many, many years ago. They don't take into example your muscle mass. It's really hard in medical offices to obtain that type of data. You would actually need to do what's called hydrostatic weighting. So it's like putting you in a dunk tank, seeing how much water you displace, and then you can figure out what your muscle mass is. There's scales now that can kind of do the body impedance, but it kind of is based off of your hydration status. So it's a good ballparking tool, but it's not completely accurate. So for right now, it's really hard. So even though we know that it's not the most credible, it's the only thing that we have out there with an ongoing trend, meaning studies that collected BMI and reported them, and we looked at health risk, we've made some associations with it. So even though we know it's not perfect, it's definitely knowing it should be something we still discuss and look at. When we look at other chronic diseases where we've looked at weight changes, we know in the diabetic or endocrine arena, even a 5% change in weight, meaning a 5% reduction, can have tremendous health outcomes. We don't have that kind of data in cancer yet, but when we look at managing cancer, because it is a chronic disease, like diabetes, like cardiovascular disease, it's helpful to know that in other arenas, that even 5% is actually meaningful or worthwhile. What about protein powders? Are they safe to put in shakes? Absolutely. So I would look for protein powders that don't have any bells and whistles. Bells and whistles are things like when you look at the percent of daily value column, if there's things in there that don't have a percent or measure, sometimes these can be herbals, sometimes it can be their own proprietary blend of whatever. Those are my least preferred because we just don't have as much research on there. But looking at a good quality whey-based protein powder, you can look at a soy-based protein. There's some great ones out there that aren't as popular, like hemp, pea powder proteins. All of them absolutely can be used. A challenge usually is finding one that's flavor compatible with what you want. There are some ones that make some pretty decent non-flavored, so they're more flexible. If not, you just have to know that, you know, your vanilla one might not mix well with, I don't know, like you mixed it with something that's more like citrus based, like it's totally orange. Maybe it'll feel like a dreamsicle, but for the most part, it could kind of feel weird. So a lot of it is like, do I like the taste? Is it something that I'd like to use? And what application am I going to use it in? Let's see. In the past, Pink has offered class at Hy-Vee. Are there plans to do another one anytime soon? Well, I'll turn that over to Cynthia because Cynthia can answer that one.
Yes. So we are.
So Cynthia's looking that up.
Yes.
And then I'll jump to another one. Another one is, I'm hearing a lot about the keto diet. What are your thoughts? I feel like the keto diet's the new Atkins. Like, you know, we had to find something new and great. ultimately, we need to look at a majority of those food selections. So the keto diet is proposed mainly off of a very high fat, moderate protein, and very minimal or little carbs. So it's really looking at those food selections. So if people are eating pork rinds dipped in cream cheese all day long, then I would say it's a bad choice. People who are trying to use more things like avocados or healthier oils, and really like reducing their intake of, let's say, starchy plants and looking at more of those non-starchies, it can be done somewhat healthfully. Anything that has more of the higher protein content diets, you have to be really careful with the health of your kidneys, looking at hydration and the stress that's put on them to process out the amount that sometimes people eat. The Atkins style diet has a little bit more published research in the field of helping people achieve a healthy weight. So when they compared an Atkins style diet versus just a calorie reduction, at 6 months, the Atkins style diet, those participants had lost more than the general healthy diet, but at a year, those numbers were the same. So it was kind of like the analogy, the tortoise and the hare, so to speak, that the Atkins just got there a little bit quicker, but in the long haul, they all got to the same endpoint. Once again, when we look at the food choices that we make, it's realizing you're still going to try to incorporate a lot of plant-based foods and making sure that if you choose a diet or a way of eating, that it's not discouraging you from doing that. What is most important for your health? What you eat or the activity you do? This is a good one. It's all from whatever your health goal is. We do know that diet makes the biggest impact on our weight status. Activity gives us good muscle mass, positive bone health, and can help with how our metabolism works. As we age, our body becomes less efficient at burning calories and we become more efficient storers. It's just the way our bodies are, which stinks. It stinks. Really the only thing that is measurably, that has some statistical significance in moving metabolism is through activity. There's a little bit of metabolic activity with caffeine, but it's not something you could sustain. Like, you can't drink pots of coffee all day long and burn calories. It just doesn't work that way. So from a health perspective, usually when I have people who are trying to figure out what their priority is, it's looking kind of at what your baseline is. If your baseline is that you're eating a lot of plant-based foods, that you're making some good healthy protein selections, you're doing them moderately, that you're using healthy fats, and your diet might just need like a few little suggestions or tweaks, then for that survivor, I would say, let's focus on physical activity if that wasn't prevalent. So it's kind of looking at where the individual is, and kind of where that overall health goal is trying to get you to where you want to be, so to speak. What's the other one? Oh, from Cynthia. Chef's Table. The Omaha Chef's Table will be on May 8th and September 25th. And the Lincoln is going to be in mid to late June, so that date is to be determined. And you can register by going to projectpink.org, and there is a registration link if you'd like to sign up. Oh, here's another one, Kombucha, benefits for the worth of the money for survivors. This is kind of an interesting one. So if you look on some of the research published by AICR, they look at fermentation. So things like sauerkraut, pickled kimchi, actually when consumed in large quantities, may contribute to the increased risk of certain gastrointestinal cancers. So sometimes the volume of those types of foods when consumed are cultural. So looking at something that might be more prevalent and that ongoing fermentation acid insult to your GI tract. They don't have as much research looking specifically at beverages, like so looking at kombucha. I would say if you enjoy the flavor, which is really kind of interesting and unique, then do it in moderation, because we don't have a lot of stuff. But when we look at it from more of a probiotic health, there's a lot of other foods that I would highly recommend choosing first before that. Is caffeine okay for breast cancer survivors to consume on a regular basis? I heard we shouldn't be drinking caffeinated coffee as it increased my risk of reoccurrence. Actually, coffee is more, I don't want to say it's more studied. It has got some more specific guidelines than tea. So we actually know that coffee consumption decreases the risk of liver cancer and endometrial cancer. So it actually has some antioxidant type properties when consumed in what you would consider normal means, meaning orally. There are some people who consume coffee differently. I don't know if I want to go down this pathway, like coffee enemas and things like that. So not talking about that type of, that's actually really detrimental to the lining of your GI tract. So if you like coffee, drink your coffee, and it's actually the caffeinated part that's been studied the most. So I would say from that standpoint, I have never seen anything specifically that would increase risk of breast cancer. I do know that there are some women out there who are caffeine sensitive, that it can affect the tenderness or how your breasts might feel. But from an oncology standpoint, it's actually got substantial research on decreasing other types of cancers. Tea has been really looked at from like black tea, white tea, all the different variations, more of those antioxidant or little non-nutritive properties that are in there, but they don't have as much research to say a decreased risk of certain types of cancers, other than they know that there hasn't been a risk associated with drinking them. So I would still say tea that it's caffeinated would still be fine too. Oh, like maybe one more question.
Yeah.
Which one should I go for, Cynthia?
You did smoke meat.
I did talk about like grilling, smoking, I did talk about grilling. So kind of to end on this one, grilling and smoking are very similar type of heat applications. Smoking for the most part is a lower temp, but it's putting that smoky vapor around the meat for a long time. So in theory, we know that there's probably an increased risk with large consumptions, just like other processed meats that use things like preservatives, sodium nitrates. So that would be an every once in a while food, and I wouldn't recommend it as a staple or an everyday type of food. So for the most part, I think we're done.
Great.
Thank you for having me. And like I said before, if there's questions that come up that you wish you would have asked, please feel free to find me at harpershope.org. Harper's Hope is a program that's at the Methodist Estherbrook Cancer Center, and I'd be more than willing to help. So thank you so much for having me.